Alien Girl's Diary. My first human encounter was Tear. Ilara was a young researcher from the planet Zephyros. She was part of a small team of explorers who studied different worlds. Zephyros was peaceful, quiet, and far from any violent conflicts. Ilara had always been curious about life beyond her own planet. But like many of her kind, she was also cautious. Her people had learned to observe other species from a safe distance, studying them without making direct contact. For years, Ilara's job had been simple: gather data about different species through transmissions and remote devices. She had never once traveled to another world, but everything changed one day when she received a strange signal. It was unlike anything she had heard before. The signal was loud, chaotic, and full of strange sounds. Ilara immediately knew it was a communication from another world. She spent hours analyzing it, trying to decode its meaning. There were patterns in the noise, patterns she could recognize. This was not just a random signal. It was a message. The message came from a place called Earth. Ilara had heard of it but knew little about it. Most of the data her people had collected was about more peaceful planets, places where life was simple and nonviolent. But Earth was different. The signal was filled with noise and confusion. It was loud, filled with shouting, the sound of engines roaring, and the hum of mechanical machines. There was so much life there, so much noise. It was overwhelming. Curiosity grew inside her. Despite the strange and chaotic signal, Ilara couldn't resist the urge to find out more. She asked for permission from her supervisors to investigate the source of the signal. It was an unusual request, and her supervisors were hesitant. But Ilara was determined. After much persuasion, they agreed, though they warned her to be careful. It was one thing to observe from a distance, but another to step into the unknown. Ilara prepared herself for the journey. She had never left Zephyros before, and the idea of traveling to another world both excited and frightened her. She packed her supplies, checked her equipment, and reviewed the basic information she had gathered about Earth. The planet was known to be wild, filled with creatures that were both fascinating and dangerous. But Ilara believed she could handle it. After all, she was a skilled researcher. She had spent her life studying the stars. How hard could it be to visit one world? The journey to Earth was long, but Ilara was used to the silence of space. Her ship hummed quietly as it made its way through the void. She spent most of the time reviewing her research, trying to predict what she might encounter on Earth. The planet's atmosphere was thick with pollution, its surface covered in cities and strange structures. She wondered how the people there could live such chaotic lives, constantly surrounded by noise and machines. When Ilara finally arrived, the sight of Earth's surface took her breath away. From space, it looked beautiful: blue oceans, vast green lands, and white clouds drifting lazily in the sky. But as she descended closer, the chaos became apparent. The air was thick and smoggy, and the cities below were teeming with activity. Ilara's ship touched down in a remote area, far from the bustling cities. She had no intention of revealing herself to the public right away. She needed time to learn about the people she was studying. The moment Ilara stepped out of her ship, she was hit by the noise. It was everywhere: machines, cars, people shouting. Earth was nothing like Zephyros. It was alive, chaotic, and loud. She instinctively wrapped her arms around herself, trying to protect herself from the overwhelming sounds. She had studied Earth's noise, but nothing could have prepared her for how intense it would feel in person. Her first human encounter was accidental. As she moved deeper into the city, she tried to stay hidden, observing people from the shadows. The humans were busy, walking quickly, their faces focused on their tasks. They didn't notice her at first. Ilara moved cautiously, staying out of sight, trying to learn more about them. Then she saw him, a man walking down the street, his face unfamiliar. His clothes were strange, unlike anything Ilara had seen before. He seemed normal, just another human in this chaotic city. But as he passed by, Ilara's curiosity got the better of her. She stepped forward just a little to get a better look. The man froze, his eyes locking with hers. Ilara was startled. She had not meant to be seen, but the man wasn't running or shouting. He didn't seem afraid. Instead, he just stared at her wide-eyed. Ilara's heart raced. She had no idea what to do. She had studied their language, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't understand the fear or the confusion on his face. Before Ilara could react, the man took a step toward her, then stopped. He seemed to hesitate. Ilara tensed, ready to defend herself if he tried anything. She didn't know what humans were capable of. She had heard stories of their strength and their violence. Her instincts told her to stay away. But instead of moving forward, the man simply stared at her. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Alara's fear grew. She took a step back, uncertain. What had she gotten herself into? The man's face shifted from confusion to concern. He reached out his hand, trembling slightly. Alara backed away, her heart pounding. She had no idea what to expect next. Was this how humans reacted to strangers? Was this how they greeted each other? In a panic, Alara quickly retreated, her feet stumbling over the uneven ground. She ran, not knowing where she was going, just trying to escape the overwhelming presence of the human. She didn't look back as she disappeared into the shadows, the man's voice calling after her. Alara collapsed in an alley, her breath ragged. Her mind raced. She had come to learn about humans, but this first encounter had been a disaster. She had misjudged everything, their behavior, their emotions, everything. What had just happened? Was this how humans acted? Were they all so unpredictable? As the city buzzed around her, Alara sat in the darkness, trying to make sense of the chaos. One thing was clear: she had much more to learn about Earth and the humans who lived there. Alara hid in the shadows of a dark alley, her heart still racing. She could still hear the distant sounds of the busy streets, but it felt as if everything had gone silent around her. Her mind raced with confusion. She had been so sure that she could handle this situation, but now she was not so certain. Her first contact with a human had been nothing like she imagined. She sat with her back against the cool stone of the alley wall, trying to calm her breathing. Her hand rested on her chest, and she could feel her heart pounding fast and hard. She had never been so scared before, not even when she first left Zephyros. There she had been surrounded by calm, quiet environments, nothing like this chaotic, noisy place called Earth. The human's face, his eyes wide with shock and confusion, kept replaying in her mind. What had gone wrong? Why did she react like that? Alara had studied Earth for so long, and she had learned about the humans, their language, their behavior. She had even prepared herself for this first contact. But nothing could have prepared her for how different they were in person. Alara wasn't sure what she expected. She had read about humans in her research, how they could be both kind and violent, how they could be curious but also afraid of the unknown. But now that she had met one, she realized how little she truly understood. The human had looked at her as if she were some kind of monster. He hadn't screamed, but his face had shown fear. And then there was his hesitation, his hand, trembling, reaching out to her. It confused her. Was he afraid, or was he trying to help her? She wasn't sure. Her instincts told her to stay away from him. After all, she was alone here on a foreign world. She didn't know who to trust. The human could have attacked her, tried to capture her, or worse. But instead, he just stood there. He didn't act as Alara expected. It was getting late, and the sky above the city was turning darker. She needed to think. She needed to understand what to do next. She had come to Earth to learn about humans, to study their behavior. But she had never imagined it would be this difficult. Alara stood up slowly, brushing the dust from her clothes. She needed to be careful. She couldn't just go back out there and make the same mistake again. The human might still be looking for her. She had to be smarter this time. She moved cautiously through the alley, peeking around corners to make sure no one was watching her. The streetlights flickered as she walked, casting long shadows on the pavement. The city seemed alive with movement, but there was a stillness in the air now. It was different from before. It wasn't as loud, not as chaotic. Maybe it was because the sun had set, or maybe it was because she was starting to feel more at home in the silence. Alara's mind kept drifting back to the man she had seen earlier. What did he mean when he looked at her like that? Was he afraid of her, or was there something else? She had never seen fear in a human's eyes before. In her studies, she had read that fear was a common emotion among humans, especially when they encountered something unfamiliar. But this was different. This wasn't just fear. It was curiosity, too. She could see it in the way his eyes darted between her alien form and the strange, unfamiliar surroundings. He wasn't just afraid of her. He was fascinated by her as much as she was fascinated by him. The thought made Alara pause. Could she really understand humans through just one encounter? Was it enough to judge them based on this brief moment? Her heart told her no. She needed more time. She needed to learn more, not just from what she had studied, but from the humans themselves. As Alara wandered through the quiet streets, she found herself drawn to a small park. The trees there were unlike the ones back home on Zephyros. They were strange, tall, and narrow, with leaves that shimmered in the moonlight. She sat on a bench near a fountain, letting the cool night air wash over her. The gentle sound of running water calmed her, and for a moment she could forget the fear and confusion she felt earlier. Ilara looked up at the sky. It was different here, too. The stars were still visible, but they didn't look the same as they did from Zephyros. Earth's sky had a different kind of beauty, more chaotic, more alive. It wasn't like the peaceful sky she was used to, where everything seemed still and perfect. The sky here felt full of possibilities, full of unknowns, and that made Ilara feel both nervous and excited. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the sounds around her. The city was still far away, but she could hear the distant hum of machines, the soft chatter of voices, and the occasional horn from a car. It was a strange kind of music to her ears, nothing like the songs of nature that played on Zephyros, but somehow it felt just as alive. Ilara took a deep breath. She couldn't stay in this park forever. She needed to go back to her ship and rethink her approach. There was still so much she didn't understand about humans, and this one encounter had left her with more questions than answers. She couldn't afford to let her fears control her. If she wanted to understand Earth, she would have to be brave. With a final glance at the night sky, Ilara stood up from the bench and made her way back toward the alley where she had first hidden. The city was dark now, but the lights still glowed in the distance. She moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows. As she walked, her thoughts continued to swirl. Could she trust the humans? Was there a way for her to learn more without causing panic or fear? Ilara was beginning to realize that understanding humans wouldn't be easy, but she was determined. This was her mission. She would stay on Earth as long as it took to truly understand its people. As she approached her ship, she paused for a moment. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't turn back now. There was too much to learn. And maybe, just maybe, the next time she encountered a human, it wouldn't be as terrifying. Ilara woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her ship. The night had passed quietly, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt a sense of calm. She had spent most of the night thinking, trying to understand what had happened the day before. Her first encounter with a human had been overwhelming, but now she knew she couldn't let fear control her. If she wanted to learn, she had to take the next step, no matter how uncomfortable it might feel. She stepped outside, the cool morning air filling her lungs. The sky above was clear, with only a few clouds drifting lazily. The city in the distance seemed much quieter than it had the night before, the chaos of the day now replaced with the peaceful stillness of early morning. Ilara took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She knew that if she was going to stay on Earth, she would need to interact with the humans again. But this time, she had to do it differently. She couldn't let fear control her decisions anymore. Ilara walked to the edge of the small park where she had sat the night before. She watched as people passed by, going about their daily routines. Some walked quickly, heads down, while others spoke to each other in low voices. She noticed a few of them glancing around as if they were looking for something or someone. There was so much she didn't understand about their behavior, but she knew one thing: she couldn't learn by hiding. She decided to try something different. Instead of staying in the shadows, she would approach them, but slowly, carefully. Ilara knew she had to blend in, to look as though she belonged here. She didn't want to cause panic or fear again. She had to act natural, even though everything about this planet felt so foreign to her. Ilara walked closer to the edge of the city, where a group of humans were gathered around a small market. They were selling food, clothes, and other items. The noise of their voices filled the air, and Ilara felt her nerves begin to rise again. It was so loud, so overwhelming. But she forced herself to keep moving. She needed to observe, to learn. As she approached the market, she saw a woman standing behind a small table selling fruit. The woman was focused on her work, her hands moving quickly as she arranged the items. Ilara hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach. But then she remembered her mission: to learn, to understand. Ilara stepped forward and spoke softly, using the few words of their language that she knew. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, surprised by the unfamiliar voice. For a moment her expression shifted to confusion, but then it softened as she took in Ilara's appearance. The woman didn't speak at first, but she nodded slowly, as if trying to understand who Ilara was. Ilara could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't used to being so far from her own world, where everyone spoke the same language, where communication was easy. But here, everything was different. Words didn't always come easily, and the looks she received were filled with questions, doubts, and fears. "I'm not from here," Alara continued, trying to explain. "I'm just curious." The woman seemed to relax a little, perhaps understanding that Alara wasn't a threat. She smiled faintly and gestured to the fruits on the table. "Would you like some?" she asked in broken, slow words, as if she were trying to make sure Alara could understand. Alara nodded, thankful for the kindness. She had expected a more hostile reaction, but this woman seemed kind, even if she didn't completely understand who Alara was or where she came from. Alara picked up an apple and examined it carefully. The fruit was different from anything she had seen on Zephyros. It was smaller, rounder, and the skin was a vibrant red. She could tell it was fresh, and for some reason it made her feel a little more at ease. She hadn't realized how much she missed simple things like food. "Thank you," Alara said quietly, and the woman smiled, offering her the fruit without asking for payment. Alara hesitated for a moment before reaching into her pouch for the small amount of currency she had brought with her. She placed it on the table, but the woman shook her head. "No, no," the woman said, her voice gentle. "It's free for you." Alara blinked in surprise. Free? That was unexpected. In her world, nothing was free, not without some kind of exchange, but here it seemed different. She didn't understand why the woman would give her something without expecting anything in return, but she was grateful. It made her feel a little less like an outsider. Alara took the apple, her mind still racing with thoughts. She couldn't understand why humans were so complex, why their actions were often unpredictable. Some of them were kind, like the woman at the market, but others had been fearful, even hostile. Why was there so much fear in the world? Why did some humans seem to see her as a threat, while others offered help without hesitation? As she walked away from the market, Alara felt a small sense of accomplishment. She had spoken to a human, and it hadn't gone terribly. But she also knew this was just the beginning. She needed to learn more. She needed to understand why humans acted the way they did. What made them tick? What were their fears, their hopes, their dreams? Later that afternoon, Alara found herself standing outside a building with large windows, watching humans inside. It looked like a school, with children running and playing in the yard. The sight was both strange and comforting to Alara. She had never seen children before, at least not in person. She had read about them, of course, but seeing them interact with each other, laughing and running around, made her feel a little less alone. She felt as though she could relate to them, even if they were so different from the children back on Zephyros. For a long while, Alara simply watched, lost in her thoughts. She felt as though she were seeing Earth for the first time, not just through the lens of a researcher, but as someone who was beginning to understand the complexity of these humans. They weren't all the same. They weren't all kind, but they weren't all fearful either. They had their flaws, their mistakes, but they had something else, too, a kind of resilience that Alara couldn't help but admire. As the sun began to set, Alara knew it was time to return to her ship. She had learned more today than she had expected, and the day's events had given her more questions than answers. But that was okay. She was learning, and she was willing to keep going. Tomorrow, she would try again. She would try to understand more. And maybe, just maybe, the next time she encountered a human, it wouldn't be so terrifying. Maybe they could learn from each other. The days passed slowly, and with each day, Alara felt herself becoming more familiar with Earth. She had learned a great deal already, more than she had expected in such a short time. The humans were complex, unpredictable, but there was something about their resilience that intrigued her. Despite their flaws and fears, they seemed to find ways to push through, to keep moving forward. Alara spent much of her time exploring the city, watching the humans as they went about their daily lives. She studied their habits, their interactions, trying to understand how they communicated, how they connected with each other. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes it felt like she was still an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. But every day she felt a little more at home. She had also begun to communicate more with the humans. She had learned enough of their language to make simple exchanges. She would speak to vendors at the market, to people on the street, always careful to stay polite and respectful. She had learned to mimic their body language, their tone, so that she wouldn't seem too different, too foreign. She didn't want to scare them, and she didn't want to seem out of place. One day, while walking through a busy part of the city, Alara came across a small group of people gathered around a street performer. The performer was a young man, playing a guitar and singing a soft, melodic tune. The crowd stood in a circle around him, listening intently, their faces relaxed and peaceful. Alara stopped, drawn by the music. She had never heard anything like it before. The sound was beautiful, gentle, and it made her feel calm, almost as if she were floating. She stood there for a while, watching the performer and the people around him. They smiled, some even closed their eyes, lost in the music. Alara couldn't understand why it made her feel so peaceful, but she felt a connection to the moment. She felt like she was part of something bigger, something that went beyond the noise and chaos she had first encountered on Earth. As the song came to an end, the crowd applauded, and the performer smiled, thanking them for their attention. Alara felt a sudden urge to speak to him, to thank him for the music that had made her feel so much calmer. She approached him slowly, unsure of how he would react, but when he saw her, he smiled warmly. "Hello," he said, his voice friendly and open. "Did you enjoy the music?" Alara was a little surprised by his friendliness. She had come to expect fear or suspicion from humans, but this man seemed kind. She nodded, smiling back at him. "Yes," she said softly. "It was beautiful. I've never heard anything like it." The man chuckled. "Well, I'm glad you liked it. Music is a universal language, you know. It doesn't matter where you're from, we can all connect through it." Alara's heart skipped a beat. "Universal language," she repeated, trying to understand. She had always been fascinated by the concept of communication, and the idea that music could connect people across such vast distances intrigued her. "Yeah," the man said. "It doesn't matter if you speak the same language. Music is something everyone can understand. It's a feeling, not just words." Alara stood there for a moment, absorbing his words. It was something she had never thought about before. She had always been focused on understanding language, on finding ways to communicate through words. But this was different. This was a form of communication that didn't require words at all. It was pure emotion, pure connection. The man looked at her curiously, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look like you're thinking pretty hard." Alara smiled gently, a little embarrassed. "I'm fine," she said, "just thinking about what you said." The man nodded. "Well, if you like music, you're welcome to stay and listen. I'm here every afternoon. Music can help with a lot of things." Alara considered his offer for a moment. She wasn't sure what it was, but something about his words felt right. She had been learning about humans for weeks now, but this moment, this conversation, felt like a breakthrough. She wasn't just studying them from the outside anymore. For the first time, she felt like she was really connecting with them. "I think I'll stay," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I'd like to hear more." The man smiled and began playing again, and Alara found herself drawn to the music once more. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. It was soothing, peaceful. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Alara felt at peace. The music didn't need words. It spoke to something deeper inside her, something she couldn't explain. As the music played on, Alara found herself thinking about all she had learned so far. She had seen the kindness in humans, the way they helped each other, the way they reached out to those in need. She had seen their fear, too, their suspicion of the unknown. But now she was beginning to understand something more. Humans were complicated, yes, but they were also full of wonder, of connection, of hope. As the performance came to an end, the crowd cheered again, and the man thanked them before packing up his guitar. Alara approached him once more, feeling a new sense of confidence. "Thank you," she said. "For the music, it helped me understand something." The man smiled again, his eyes warm. "I'm glad to hear that. Music is a powerful thing. It helps us connect, even when we don't have all the answers." Alara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She didn't have all the answers yet. There was still so much she didn't understand about humans. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was beginning to see the world through their eyes, to understand their emotions, their fears, their joys. "Maybe I'll come back tomorrow," Alara said. "I'd like to hear more." The man smiled. "I'll be here. Music doesn't stop, you know. It keeps going." Alara watched him leave, a sense of peace settling over her. She had made a connection today, not through words, but through something deeper, something that didn't need to be explained. And for the first time, Alara realized that maybe she was starting to understand humans after all. Maybe, just maybe, she had found the key to bridging the gap between her world and theirs. As she walked back to her ship that evening, Alara couldn't help but smile. She had a long way to go, but she felt like she was finally on the right path. Tomorrow, she would continue learning. Tomorrow, she would continue to connect. And who knows, maybe the next time she encountered a human, it wouldn't be so hard. Maybe, just maybe, she would finally understand them completely. The next few days passed quickly, and Alara found herself growing more comfortable with her new life on Earth. Each day brought new experiences, new lessons, and a deeper understanding of the humans around her. She was beginning to realize that she wasn't just studying them anymore. She was becoming part of their world, even if it was only in small ways. The park near her ship had become her place of reflection. It was quiet there, away from the bustling city, a place where she could gather her thoughts. She often found herself sitting on the same bench, watching the people who came and went, observing their interactions, their behaviors. There were so many things she had yet to understand, but she was beginning to feel a sense of connection, not just to the humans she encountered, but to the planet itself. Alara had continued her interactions with the humans she met, always careful to remain respectful, to observe before acting. She had spoken to more people at the market, learned more about their culture, their traditions. She had even tried some of their food, which was different from what she had expected, but surprisingly good. It wasn't the same as the meals on Zephyros, but it had its own charm. One afternoon, as Alara sat quietly on her bench, a familiar face appeared in the park. It was the man she had met days before, the street performer. He was walking by, his guitar slung over his shoulder, but this time he wasn't performing. Instead, he seemed to be in a hurry, his eyes focused ahead. Alara hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach him. She had enjoyed their brief conversation before, but she wasn't sure how to continue their interaction. However, as if sensing her uncertainty, the man stopped when he saw her. He smiled warmly, as though nothing had changed since their last meeting. "Hey there," he said, his voice friendly. "I see you're still here. The music was good, huh?" Alara smiled back, feeling a little more at ease. "Yes, it was beautiful," she replied. "It made me think." The man raised an eyebrow, curious. "About what?" Alara thought for a moment, trying to find the right words. "About you, about music. It's different from what I know, but it makes me feel something. It's hard to explain." The man nodded as though he understood. "Music does that. It gets into your heart, even when you don't have the words for it. Sometimes it's the only way to say what we can't put into words." Alara was struck by his words. She had always thought of music as something that could be studied, understood from an analytical perspective. But the way he spoke made her realize that music was more than just sound. It was emotion, connection. It was a language in its own right. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Alara said softly. "It's not just about hearing the notes, it's about feeling them." The man smiled again, his expression kind. "Exactly," he said. "It's something we all share, no matter where we come from. Music, feelings, they connect us even when we don't speak the same language." Alara nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. She had learned so much in the past few weeks, but this was the most important lesson of all. Humans were more than just their words. They were more than their fears or their weaknesses. They were beings capable of deep connection, even without understanding everything about one another. Music had shown her that. "So," the man said after a moment, "I'm not performing today, but I'm glad I ran into you. How about we grab a coffee or whatever humans drink around here? I'm curious about your thoughts." Alara hesitated for a moment. She had spent so much time observing and studying the humans, but this was different. It was an invitation, not from a stranger, but from someone who had shown her kindness. She was still unsure about many things, still uncertain about her place on Earth, but this felt natural. It felt like something she could do, something she wanted to do. "I would like that," she said with a smile. They walked together to a small cafe nearby, where the man ordered coffee for himself and a tea for Alara. It wasn't the same kind of tea she had back on Zephyros, but it was warm and comforting. They sat at a small table near the window, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, Alara felt completely at ease. She wasn't thinking about what she had to learn or what she had to study. She wasn't thinking about how different she was or how alone she sometimes felt. She was simply enjoying the moment. "So, what's it like where you're from?" the man asked after a few moments of comfortable silence. "You mentioned you're not from around here. You don't look like the others." Alara smiled softly, her eyes thoughtful. She had wondered how much to share with him. She had been cautious in the past, but now it felt right to open up a little more. "I'm from Zephyros," she said quietly. "It's a peaceful place. We live differently than you do here, but we're not so different, I think. We've learned to live in harmony with our world. The man listened intently, nodding as she spoke. Harmony, he repeated. That's something I think the world could use more of. It's crazy, isn't it? How people can be so different, but at the same time we all want the same things: peace, happiness, connection. Alara looked at him, surprised by how much she agreed with his words. It was true. Despite all the chaos and confusion, the humans she had met all seemed to share a desire for something better, something more. You're right, she said softly. I've seen that. I've seen the fear and the doubt, but I've also seen the kindness. The willingness to help, to understand. The man smiled warmly at her. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's all we've got, and we're doing our best, one step at a time. Alara smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in days. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But for the first time since arriving on Earth, she didn't feel alone. She felt like she was beginning to understand humans, not just as a species, but as individuals. She could see their strengths and weaknesses, their hopes and fears. And in return, they had shown her kindness, respect, and a willingness to learn about her as well. As the evening wore on and the cafe began to empty, Alara realized something important. She had come to Earth to study humans, to understand them, but now it felt like she was part of something bigger. She was no longer just an observer. She was learning from them, growing with them. And maybe, just maybe, she had found a place for herself here on this strange and beautiful world. When it was time to leave, the man stood up and smiled at her. I'm glad we met, he said, his voice sincere. It's not often I get to talk to someone from somewhere so far away. Maybe we can do this again sometime? Alara nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. I would like that, she said quietly. As they parted ways, Alara felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. She had come to Earth seeking knowledge, seeking answers. But what she had found was something more: connection, understanding, and the realization that she wasn't as different from these humans as she had once thought. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Alara was no longer afraid. She was ready to continue, to learn, to grow. And whatever happened next, she knew she was no longer alone.